I think
And
we can invite them to chat directly with Jonathan so that we can save some time and we can
right,
go to the next speaker. And also we will have a separate kind of panel discussion later. Greshan, you,
right.
yeah, Catherine is
Yes.
here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good. So let's move on to our next keynote speaker. That is Miss Catherine Hughes. And so let me introduce Miss Hughes. So Miss Hughes is an expert on peace building, social justice movements, and nonviolent strategy and resistance. She trains, convenes, and researches in solidarity with hundreds of grassroots activists and social justice movements across the world, including travel to 75 countries over the last 10 years. She co-founded and is executive director of Solidarity 2020 and Beyond, an international network of grassroots activists, journalists, and scholars in solidarity with nonviolent movements around the world. In 75 countries, working on over 100 plus movements for peace, justice, and freedom. Catherine was a 2020 Rotary Peace Fellow in Thailand, consultant for Global Fund for Women, European Union Peace Initiative in Palestine and Israel, and also Youth Advisory Panel. Youth Advisory Panel Palestine, uh, African Youth Movement, and Afghanistan Women's Peace Process Consultant. Uh, uh, Director at International Center on Nonviolent Conflict and Executive Director of Peace Bridges International USA. So with that, uh, Ms. Hughes, please take over.
Thank you so much, Greshan. Thank you, Chaminda, for inviting me today. Great to see Jonathan, who we're always in touch one way or another. I'm joining everyone from Bangkok, Thailand tonight. And so it's a bit late my time, but I first of all wanted to say congratulations to everyone in Sri Lanka. This was an amazing few months, but especially this last week and the protests of the last couple of days. And it's looking extremely hopeful, although, as I'm sure people are mentioning and we'll discuss a little more today, there have been a number of countries that have been able to pull down or weaken the authoritarian groups in power, the corrupt leaders. And yet what we're finding more and more around the world is that it's much harder to build up a system that works and to build up structures that work, especially if you're dealing with a country that has had those kind of structures, civil wars and other kinds of challenges over many years. And I'm sure probably Jonathan brought up some of that and other speakers have done so. Basically, what I wanted to talk a little bit about for my period of time is a little bit about my organization. Chaminda asked me to do that because it is really an international network of activists all over the world that are working on very similar issues that you are. And it's really been quite useful for them. And I continue to learn so much from them over the years to be connected, to share, to learn from each other, because only people that are doing these things on the ground are really the best ones to be leading the way, to be learning tools from others. And as Jonathan has done many research and case studies around the world, I have also documented and learned from many, many different movements all over the world over the last 20, 30 years. But things keep changing. Things are never the same. It's always a unique situation on the ground. And so there's always new things that are coming up and that people are trying and learning and succeeding and sometimes failing. Our group, Solidarity 2020 and Beyond, and Greshan mentioned some of the past positions I've had. I've worked with ICNC as the director of their field initiatives, where I got to travel around the world and work with a lot of amazing activists, many whom are still part of our network. as well as Peace Brigades International, which was a group that started in the US about 40 years ago and provides protective accompaniment to human rights defenders around the world. So many of them are also working on democratization issues. What we do is we basically focus on these core group of activists at the grassroots around the world, many of them working on democratization, self-determination, anti-corruption struggles around the world. So for instance, you know, Tunisia, Sudan, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Palestine, Syria, lots of places in Latin America, lots of places in Southeast Asia, South Asia, India, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka. I was really lucky to go to Sri Lanka a few years ago and worked with Chaminda on a number of meetings and some trainings on nonviolent resistance for some of your peace groups and local groups that are working on these issues as well. And the whole point is that the activists are driving this initiative. So there are cohorts that are forming around the world. I just finished a training here in Thailand with 5 countries from around Southeast Asia who have many similar issues around Mekong River, issues around land confiscation and corruption, around, again, democratization, expression, freedom of expression and speech within the governments that they're dealing with here. And then we have a group in South Asia that includes Sri Lanka and your groups, and then Latin America, Middle East, and then all over Africa, many parts of Europe as well. The idea is to get them together and to have a lot of convenings, peer-to-peer learning, meetings, discussions. We have participatory research where people are researching and documenting what they're doing so they can pass it on and document it for their own movements and their own campaigns and lessons learned. They can share it with others who are going through similar issues. You know, for instance, Sudan right now is having a very hard struggle against a much more entrenched military and much more kind of oppressive military than you're dealing with in Sri Lanka right now. But they have a lot of lessons that they're learning around how to negotiate. Jonathan mentioned that, how to bring different groups together, how to deal with groups that have fought wars or had a lot of different kinds of civil wars over the years with each other. And so they're, learning several similar things that you're going to be struggling with moving forward in a little different context, but there's similar issues. China's involved. India's not so much involved in their struggle, but there are a number of the external allies that we would call other countries that also play really key roles in what's going on. One of the things I wanted, so that's one thing, and if people are interested in Solidarity 2020 and beyond, learning more about it, I'll put our website in the chat. You can check us out, and we'll be doing an international convening in Nepal in November with about 40 to 50 of the leaders of all these movements around the world, so that they'll be sharing and learning from each other. We'll be doing a MENA online virtual convening in September. I'll be in Palestine in September and December doing a number of workshops in that region, and then also coming up in Africa sometime in the spring, a number of spaces that we're in. Southern Africa, Zimbabwe, South Africa, we work a lot in. And then we have a lot of members in East Africa and also in West Africa that are doing a number of different types of work. So that's a little bit about my organization and the network that I have helped create, but it's founded by many of us and many of the activists that the reason it's called Solidarity 2020 and Beyond was because during COVID, we started hearing from so many activists around the world who said, look, things were kind of looking up and not looking so bad for us. But when COVID hit, we've been pushed back, whether it's incomes, whether it's more oppression from the government using the justification of COVID to keep us at home, whether it's child marriages, whether it's economic struggles that we're having, healthcare issues. And so we really want to get together and make sure we have an international presence, because together we're always stronger. And as you probably know, many places in your own region, they do this very often, is the authoritarian governments get the same legislation, the same laws, the same rules from each other and implement them against the movements and the nonviolent actors and the civil society trying to work for change. And so while they're learning and sharing with each other, we need to be doing the same thing and learning and growing and sharing with each other. I don't know whether Jonathan mentioned, and I just got on, I was having some technical issues based on, I think, where I am right now. But there is such a thing called the trifecta, and Bruce brought up indicators of success. Hardy Merriman and Peter Ackerman have worked on this, as well as others kind of expanding it over time. But there are three main indicators that show that your movement or your campaign is doing well. And if you have those in place, you know that, you probably hopefully will be winning at some point, or at least if they're not all in place, you need to really work on them. And those three, which I see you all having been done very well, and it makes a lot of sense, are unity, number one. So this idea of trying to be across different diverse groups, trying to be across different parties. I think Jonathan was just mentioning that when I got on, trying to be kind of inclusive in your view as much as possible, being very clear in your unified stance on what you stand for and what you stand against. A lot of times, many movements can get together on what they stand against, an authoritarian government or a person or a corruption, but they have a lot harder time on talking about what we really stand for together, what that vision of tomorrow looks like, what we want our society to stand for, our values, our messaging, our vision of where we're moving toward. And I know that Chaminda and I have talked a lot about different economic systems that you may be looking at. There are a lot of issues that you're dealing with because of the World Bank and IMF and structural issues in the economy that I know many of you are probably thinking through about how to change this, how to improve this, what it's going to look like in the future, in the world that you're building, in the country that you're building, in the community that you're building. And only you all locally can do that, can get together, negotiate, facilitate discussions between different groups. I understand mainly the majority group, the Shringalese, have been involved mainly in what's been happening. But as we know, there are many Muslims and Hindus and Tamils and other groups, Christian groups within Sri Lanka that will all need to be at the table and be part of that discussion in some way as you build, this future country that you're looking at. The second one of those indicators that's so important is having strategic planning skills and capacity within the movement. And I see that you all have been doing a lot of very strategic things, whereas there's some economic issues and strikes and marches and organizing in various ways. So it's not just about having an overall strategic plan, but it's about that capacity to be able to move and change and react and grow as your opponent does that, because it's this ongoing struggle that you're going to be involved in. It's not going to just stop here. It's lots of things, lots of challenges yet to come. And I like to look at leadership in a horizontal way and connect it to the grassroots as part of that strategic planning capacity and skills, that you're connecting to the grassroots, that the leadership of the movement has a voice and is listening to the people on the ground. And then the third issue is nonviolent discipline. And again, watching what happened the last few days, it's really been amazing. And over the last several months, even though, there was tear gas shot at you and some people were attacked, you really stood firm and people stayed nonviolent and they kept to this peaceful protest. And therefore, I think you probably gained credibility across the world. The movement gained credibility within your own country, that you're trying to stay nonviolent for the change that you're looking for as a great model. And so I think those three indicators, from what I can see, were in place. And that's probably part of why you've been so successful to this point. And so I wanted to just mention that piece as well. And so I think, Chaminda, I'm not sure time frame. I have a feeling I'm probably getting to the end of my time, but I would say those are some of the main things I would be looking at, including an idea of constructive engagement, which, you know, Gandhi used a lot, this idea of how do you build engagement in society, you know, so you're building up a view, you're building up your society, not just pulling something down. You need to have something in place to replace the groups that you're pulling down at this point, and to create change there. And so that will be critical to kind of think through what that looks like. With Gandhi, it was very simplistic, going back to weaving their own material, being much more self-sufficient from the British colonialism. But I can see in Sri Lanka, where you have so much technology and you're thinking about a lot of ideas for the future, whether it's the 3D printing or other kinds of things, that can really help through technology build a new society. So I think that is a very exciting thing that I can see you're working on. And then this whole idea of parallel institution building, whether it's an economic system, a barter system, different ways of looking at money, different ways of looking at society or social system, that if the one that's there, those institutions are not working so well, you can build parallel ones. You can actually create new ones, you know, and have those ready in place for what you are now trying to, some of the corruption you're trying to bring down. So those are some other important things that other countries that have gone through this process. And again, you've been struggling for quite a while in a number of various areas. So let me stop there. And I don't know whether there are any questions, or we'll have some further discussion in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katherine, and that was a very very informative speech. So again, we have maybe since we are kind of tight on time now, I would say if there's a we have time for one question. Probably we can take 2 minutes time to answer the question, and then we can move on to the next speaker. Anybody has a direct question to Katherine?
Yeah, I'm Shanika, by the way, from Seattle. Sorry, I was joining late. Katherine, I was going to ask how, based on your experience, how long should that movement, how long and strong should that movement be continued to keep the momentum? And what are those steps that, I mean, you mentioned a little bit, but I wanted it to be very specific as to realize the goals that they've been fighting for.
Yeah, that's a great question, Shanika. A lot of times I think people view a movement or as something that will have kind of a beginning and an end. I think campaigns are more likely to do that. And they're anywhere from like 3 months to a year. Normally they can be a little longer. But many movements that I see, that we see across the world now, are actually ongoing, and they can be generational. So think about the US, the anti-slavery movement, and then it became the anti-Jim Crow, right? And now, we have a whole nother movement for racial justice, because it just keeps, you gain one piece and you move forward, and then sometimes the opponents push back, and then you move forward again, and you get, so it's kind of an up and down movement. And so what I would say is, over the next year or two, I think it's going to be really critical to have an interim government, to move forward with the vote, to get some opposition parties in place and some parties that can move forward to institutionalize some of the change that you're working on. But my guess is that it's going to continue for many, many years into the future, because once you make some of those movements towards success, and once you build up some wins, there is going to be some pushback. And that just happens, consistently everywhere. And so I would say just be ready to be in the struggle for the long run, to celebrate, to rest, to feel like, okay, this is amazing success that we've had. And it hasn't been too much cost as far as human lives, which is always really great to know and to hear, but we have a long way to go. There are a lot of challenges that we have, and as we move forward, there will be parts of society or parts of external countries or actors or elites of various types that will push back. And so, Shanika, I would say just be prepared for the long run, but in the next year or two to really try to push forward and institutionalize some of these important changes, so that you've got those in place and then can build on those over time.
Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Shanika, for the question, and thank you, Katherine, for your valuable contribution to this forum. And again, please make sure to ask questions through chat functions.